Hello, everyone. It's Chrissy Scivicque with EatYourCareer.com, helping you create a nourishing professional life. Welcome to this month's free training webinar. I will pause for a moment and let everyone get situated. If you can hear me and you can see me, I would appreciate it if you would just type the word yes into the chat menu. That way I know I'm not talking to myself. Excellent. I see people saying hello already from all over. We've got Southern California representing. We've got Ottawa, Cincinnati. We've got Massachusetts, San Francisco Bay Area, Ohio. Awesome. And I see lots of yeses. We've got someone in Charlotte, North Carolina. Fantastic. Sunny California, Quebec, Canada, Iowa, Birmingham. Awesome. You guys are awesome. I'm so happy to have you all here. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join me for today's seminar. I want to make sure that everyone has the handout. So I did type the link into the chat menu earlier. You can click on that link and it'll open the handout for you if you didn't get a chance to download it already. And this is how I'm going to be doing it, I think, for the rest of the year, that we'll just have the live video conversation and the handout for talking through these topics for the webinar. Next month, I might have a more comprehensive handout because I'm just really excited about the topic and I have a lot to share on it. I'll tell you more about that at the end of today's session. But we're probably not going to be doing slides for the rest of the year just because I think this is working a lot better. So with that, make sure you have your handout and we're going to jump into today's session where we are talking about setting limits and managing expectations at work. So I want to make sure that you know you can type questions into the chat menu at any point in time. I'll pause throughout the session and just take a look over there. If you mark your question as a question, it pops up as red for me, so it really sticks out. So I'd appreciate that. I think that this might be a topic that sparks a lot of questions. It might be one that sparks a lot of sharing around the situations that you've encountered in the workplace. And I think that would be fantastic if that happens. So please feel free to share away in that chat menu. That's what it's there for. All right, let's talk about managing expectations first. This is a topic that I absolutely adore, and I speak about it in, I feel like, almost every training session that I do, particularly for administrative professionals. I know that I have a huge admin community that is a part of the Eat Your Career community, which I really love. I am a former administrative professional. So I understand that world a lot, and managing expectations is a big piece of being successful as an administrative professional. That being said, if you are not an administrative professional or executive assistant or something like that, these strategies will work for you as well. I just know from my past experiences in the workplace that as an assistant, this was absolutely critical. So I speak on this topic quite a bit to administrative audiences. And when we're talking about managing expectations, it's really about recognizing that we are human. And as humans, we have limitations. I think there is a really negative sort of thing that's starting to happen where people are referring to, particularly administrative professionals, as superheroes. Right? And it's meant to be a kindness. It's meant to be something to kind of pump you up. You are a superhero. And yes, I love that idea. But with that idea comes the idea that you can do absolutely anything, that you do not have human limitations. And people create some really impossible expectations for you to live up to when they're thinking of you as this superhero. So it's a dangerous mindset. I do believe that you, all of you, can do anything you put your mind to. I believe that. I believe that anything is possible, but at what cost? That's always my question. Anything is possible. You can do anything. But what are you willing to sacrifice to make those things happen? I don't want you to sacrifice your well-being. I don't want you to sacrifice your mental, physical, emotional health. I don't want you to sacrifice your reputation and your credibility in order to get impossible things done. Instead, what I want for you is to be able to recognize that as a human, you do have some limitations. And what that means is that while you might want to internally just say yes to absolutely everything that crosses your desk, at the same time, you need to back up and pause and think about setting yourself up for success, managing expectations so that you can ensure you are delivering successfully. So I'm going to pause for 1 minute and take a look over in chat. It looks like people are having some issues. If you're having issues, make sure that you just hit reconnect. That fixes the problem most of the time. And I'm going to keep going, assuming that most of you are not having issues. But again, just hit reconnect if at any point in time you do. All right, let's talk about the handout. As far as limitations go, I've identified 4 different categories of limitations, and that is the first 4 blank bullets that you see there on your handout. As human beings, we have 4 different areas of limitation. The first one is physical limitation. So you can write that one in on your handout. The word is physical. We have physical limitations because I am but one person. I have but 2 hands. I cannot be in 2 different places at once. That is just a given physical limitation of the world that we live in. So we already intuitively know that because we don't like to double book ourselves, right? Because we know we physically can't be in 2 different places at once. So if we have an appointment on the books for 11 a.m. in the morning and someone wants to schedule a meeting with us for 11 a.m. in the morning, we are very comfortable saying no to that. We are very comfortable setting a limit and countering and giving them another option because 11 a.m. physically, I'm already taken. I'm already spoken for. I can't be at another place at the same time. That's just a physical limitation. So we do have physical limitations. The second one that we have is mental and emotional. So the second line is for both of those things, mental and emotional. You can fill that in. The second bullet, mental and emotional limits. So let's talk about mental limits for a minute. Mentally, I cannot think about 10 different things at a time and really give all 10 of those things my attention. I have that mental limitation. As human beings, we really have a limitation that we really can't think about more than one. You know, we try to do 2 at a time all the time. We try to multitask because we think that's necessary and expected. We think it's possible. Really, it's not. If we think about 2 different things at a time, we're literally just kind of like bouncing back and forth between those 2 different things. We're not giving either one our full attention, our performance, and our ability to comprehend either item tends to decrease. We know this. We know this in our lives because we're always told, don't drive and text, right? You can't do 2 things at once. You can't mentally be present driving and mentally be texting at the same time. It's a limitation. So we do have mental limitations. We can't think about everything all at once. In terms of emotional limitations, these are limitations that a lot of us don't respect, but they're very important. So I know many of us have been through challenging personal times. If you lose a loved one, if you're going through a messy, ugly divorce, if there's something that's happening in your personal life that is pulling at you emotionally, you may find that when you walk into work, you're in this place where you're like, I can't emotionally take anything else. My cup is full. Add another drop, and I'm gonna spill over. That's emotional limitation. We all have that. And sometimes we have to be able to say, I need to have a rest day for myself. I need to take care of myself, and I'm going to have to, take a day off of work. I'm going to have to take a PTO day so that I can take care of myself and emotionally rest and be able to handle whatever happens the next day getting back to work. So that's emotional limitations. The third bullet point that you can fill in there is time limitations. We also have limitations of time. So the third fill in is time. And we all know this. There's only 24 hours in any day. Most of us work an 8-hour workday. Some of us work some overtime. We can go up to 9, 10 hours in a workday. Goodness, you start pushing it over that, and you're really starting to drain yourself mentally and emotionally because you're now stretching your time limits. So there are natural limitations of time. The last fill in there for limitations is energy and attention. Energy and attention. Again, we are all only human. And if we're not taking care of ourselves in all of those other areas, our ability to remain energized throughout the day and our ability to give the proper attention to the things around us diminishes. So those are the main areas of limitation that we want to understand for ourselves and we want to respect. I'm going to pause because I see a lot of activity in chat. Loretta, I so appreciate it. It looks like you're troubleshooting over there for people who are having problems with the webinar platform. Thank you. I just love that. You guys are amazing. Replays of the webinars, as Barbara is saying, are always available in the library. Next year, we will be changing our platform. I'm going to GoToWebinar, which is a much more stable platform. So we will not be having issues later on, down the road. But for right now, making the transition is just a little bit too much right here as we enter the last part of the year here. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts and troubleshooting over there in the chat menu. So those are the limitations that we have as human beings. What I want to do is talk about the consequences of disrespecting your limits. So as I said before, a lot of us, we don't consider some of those limitations to be all that important to us. And when we don't respect our limits and we don't actively manage the expectations that others are placing on us, we can encounter a whole variety of negative consequences. And I've listed 3 out here for you on in about the middle of the first page of your handout. And the first one is higher stress. Higher stress. So you can fill in the blank with the word stress. What we want to be doing is developing a career that is sustainable, that we can stay with it. We can keep our energy high. We can keep our mental engagement high. We can physically be present for our career for the long term. We don't want to burn out. When you don't respect your limits, you can reach burnout. And burnout is when you are completely emotionally, mentally, and physically depleted. You've got nothing left to give. I did this training in an organization a few months ago, and I had someone who said, well, I don't ever set limits or manage expectations in any way because I'll just do whatever I have to do. If I have to stay late, I'll do it. If I have to work weekends, I'll do it. And so she had really developed this idea that in order to be a star performer, she had to do absolutely everything that was asked of her, regardless of the consequences that had on her own life and well-being. And while I can respect the drive and ambition behind the sentiment, it is not a sustainable path. It cannot last. And I want you to recognize that so that you can make some minor adjustments that are comfortable for you and for the people around you that still allow you to be a star performer, but you can make those adjustments so that you can have a sustainable career. You won't hit that burnout place. So one of the consequences is higher stress, which ultimately can lead to burnout. The second one is greater risk of failure. Greater risk of failure. So failure is the fill in the blank there. If you are not actively managing the expectations that people are placing on you, and you're just saying yes to absolutely everything that comes through without really thinking through, is this something I can successfully deliver on? Is this a promise I can follow through on? If you're just saying yes, and then ultimately it's something you really can't deliver on, your chances of failure are enormous. Whereas on the front end, if you had just said, let's back up a little bit and let's kind of adjust what your expectations are so that I can make sure I deliver well, you would have been successful. So you're increasing your chances of failure if you don't set limits and manage expectations. And then finally, all of these things can damage your credibility and your reputation. So 2 fill-ins there, credibility and reputation. Credibility, reputation. So there are a lot of consequences for what can happen if you're not willing to actively engage in managing the expectations that others are placing on you. I put at the bottom of page 1 what we are responsible for. We are responsible for understanding what our limits are and how they impact our ability to deliver in the workplace. We are responsible for expressing our limits clearly so we can set appropriate expectations with others. And then finally, we're responsible for managing those limits so we can effectively follow through on our commitments. Those are the 3 things that are our responsibility. No one else is going to do those things for us. We're the only ones who truly know our limits. We're the only ones that know everything that's on our plate, all of the priorities that are in front of us, all of the competing demands. We're the only ones who can say, you know what? If you add another thing to this pile, something's going to have to move away. We are the only ones who can say that. No one else knows everything that we are trying to manage in the workplace. I do also have a note at the bottom of page 1, which is very important. It talks about the word no. Now, the terminology of saying no is a very common shorthand for the idea of setting limits and renegotiating expectations. I don't like the terminology of saying no because no is never well accepted in the workplace. Whenever you say no, people automatically feel defensive and they want to argue and they think you're not a team player. They think that you're not willing to do, what's needed to get the job done. So saying no isn't helpful in most situations. You actually can set limits without saying the word no ever. I recommend that you reserve the word no for very specific situations, which I articulated here in your handout. Reserve no for times when you're being asked to do something that is unethical, illegal, or outside the scope of your authority. So, for example, if someone came to me and asked me to sign a check on an account that I don't have signing authority for, I'm very comfortable saying no. I cannot do that. It's outside the scope of my authority. It's illegal for me to sign that check. It's a very clear line that I can draw. Now, there's other things that you might think, well, I can say no to that, but really, there's some options there. So another example would be if your boss came to you and said, I need you to go out on our 17th floor. The windows need to be cleaned. You're not a janitor. You're not going to strap yourself in and climb up to the 17th floor and clean those windows. I know that. But you can certainly say, I'm happy to call the window cleaning company. I can get that done for you. So there's situations where you can still say, I'll get the situation taken care of. You might not be the one who actually takes care of it yourself. You might delegate that responsibility to others in some way, but you can still say, no problem. We'll get the job done. What you're asking of me, I will see it through. So no is for very specific circumstances when things are unethical, illegal, or fully outside the scope of your authority. All right, so that's page 1 of our handout. We'll flip on over and talk about the 4 C's of renegotiating expectations. So these are the 4 steps when someone brings you a request and it's something that potentially is going to push you past your limits, be it a physical limit, a time limit, a mental limit, whatever. If that happens, you don't want to just say no, right? Instead, you want to use a process to renegotiate what those expectations are so that you can successfully deliver. So the first C in the renegotiating expectations list is confirm. The first C is confirm. And it says, make sure you understand what is being asked of you. Confirm. Make sure that you understand what's being asked of you. So you're basically checking in to say, okay, so it sounds like what you're asking for, you need a 100-slide PowerPoint presentation and you want it to be flashy. You want all sorts of great graphics in it and transitions and animations. You want that presentation done, 100 slides, and you need it done today. Is that right? So you're just verifying that you're very clear on what the person is asking of you. The second C is counter. So the fill in there is counter. You're offering an alternative expectation, focusing on what you can do, not what you can't do. So you might be providing a new deadline. You might be offering some revised expectations for outcomes. So counter is item number 2. So what you're doing here is you're countering what they are telling you. So in the example I just gave, okay, my boss has just asked me to create a 100-slide PowerPoint presentation with all the bells and whistles, and he wants it done today. So I'm going to counter back. Now that I fully understand what's being asked of me, I'm going to counter back and say, would it be possible that I can get this to you by the end of day tomorrow? Give myself another 24 hours to work on this presentation because it's a huge project here. I could counter back and I could say, would it be possible for me to get you the 100-slide presentation without the bells and whistles? Because putting together 100 slides already is going to be very time consuming. You're only giving me a day here. Can you do without those bells and whistles and all the fancy graphics and things? So I'm just opening up the negotiation process. I'm countering. So step number 3 is to compromise. Compromise. That's your third C, your third fill-in. Compromise. You want to identify a way forward that meets the needs of the other person and also ensures that you're able to deliver successfully. So you've got to find some sort of middle ground there. It would be wonderful if we could just counter an expectation, offer an alternative expectation, and the other person would always just say, excellent, that sounds great, yes. It doesn't happen that way, as I'm sure you know. So we have to be willing to compromise in a fashion that allows us to still be successful and helps meet their needs. And then finally, step number 4 is to confirm. Reiterate what was agreed upon, if possible, in writing. So if you've gone back and forth with someone trying to establish when something will be due or what the expectations are in particular and the outcomes, you want to make sure that you finalize that. Maybe send a follow-up email and just say, I know we went back and forth on this a while, but here's what we finally landed on, just to confirm. So you're putting it in writing. A lot of times people forget what they agreed upon, and maybe they remember the original expectation, and you just want to help put it in writing to confirm with them, here's what we agreed upon. Those are the 4 steps of managing expectations. Now, I want to just focus on the fact that sometimes you will do your best to renegotiate. You'll follow these 4 steps. And at the end of the day, nothing changes. The parameters remain the same. So if I go back to my boss and I say, this 100-slide PowerPoint presentation that you need with all the bells and whistles by the end of the day today, I try to negotiate that. And he says, it is what it is. That's what I need. I need it today. I've got to make it work. I have to make that work in some form or fashion. So my other alternatives are, okay, can I pass off some of my other priorities for today to someone else so I can focus solely on this PowerPoint presentation? Or can I bring in someone else who can do 50 of the slides and I'll do 50 slides and we'll do it as a team? I've got to think about what my other resources are so that I can meet that expectation. I've tried my best to manage it and renegotiate. It didn't work. So now I've got to make it work with the parameters that remain. And we have options. There are things that you can do to bring in other people, bring in support from other people. Utilize your team to be able to deliver on those things if and when they are going to stretch you past your limits. If you are negotiating on a regular basis, though, it should only be really on occasion that you're having to do that kind of scrambling and maneuvering to try to meet crazy expectations. That should really just be on occasion, and you can say, oh, I'm willing to work late tonight because I do this only every once in a while when something comes up and it's big and I'm needed. And that's sustainable. I can do that. We can work a late night here or there. We can work a weekend here or there. It's when we're making it a pattern that it becomes unsustainable. All right, so I'm going to pause for a moment and check in on chat. Let me go back through the 4 C's really quickly because I think I might have said the first C wrong. I'm seeing a couple people in there. The first C is clarify. Clarify. Did I say that wrong? Clarify. Thank you. Shannon got it. Shannon, yes. Clarify. The second C is counter. The third C is compromise. And the fourth C is confirm. I think I said confirm twice. Thank you, guys. You guys are great. Okay, fantastic. So those are the 4 C's. Apologies for my my slip up there. You guys caught me though. I love that. Okay, let's talk about making priorities visible, because this is a wonderful tool that helps people to set reasonable expectations themselves. If you make your priorities visible, people can see everything that's on your plate, and then they start to mentally do the math with your limitations, and they say, is this a priority that goes above all of those others that she's working on? So I used to have a whiteboard in my office that showed all of my top priorities for the day. And anytime that my executive would come in and say, this is an number 1 priority, it's got to go at the top of the list, I would always be like, this list? Are you sure? Look at what's on my plate for today. Does this new priority that you just passed me really go above everything that's on that list? Because if it does, there's a chance that I'm not going to get to the things that are at the bottom of the list. That way, my executive could make the decision himself. He could recognize what was a reasonable request, and he could back off a little bit. And he would sometimes say, you know what? No, that's more important. He would point to the whiteboard. No, that's more important. Focus on that. Save this one for tomorrow. They will manage their own expectations if they can visibly see the full plate in front of you. So that's an option. I love the whiteboard option. It helps to just keep people really apprised. It's a visual indicator with everything that's on your plate, and then they can help you also renegotiate. I'm a firm believer that you don't have to prioritize all alone. A lot of times it does make sense to look at the whiteboard together with your executive or your manager, whoever it is, and ask them to help you kind of beautiful mind it to create the perfect order of how you should be handling things if you've got a lot that's happening. All right, so I am going to check in on questions regarding renegotiating expectations, because after this, I'm going to talk about setting limits with behaviors. And that is kind of a shift. It's still regarding those limits that we mentioned before, but it's quite a different conversation. So let's see here what questions we have. Thank you to those of you who have marked your questions as questions, so they pop out in red. Emily, the handout link is at the very top or middle. Actually, a lot of people have pasted the handout link into chat, so you can grab it there. Those who are watching on the recording, the handout link will be in the free career resource library for you. Okay, questions. Let's see. How do you prioritize work when you work remotely? Jan, it's a great question, and I would love to know if there's a specific challenge with it, because working remotely shouldn't be any different from working in person in terms of prioritization. You still have to capture everything that's coming in. You have to identify deadlines. You need to understand the expectations that are coming at you, renegotiate them when possible, and then figure out the best order in which to tackle things. So that prioritization process remains the same wherever you are. If the problem with working remotely is that you don't have the time or the ability to have these kinds of back and forth conversations, I would encourage you to find a way to open up the conversation and the dialogue with managing expectations so that you can have the conversation before something lands on your plate that you can't deliver on. What if you do not have space? I work in an open environment. For a whiteboard, Deborah, if you don't have space for a whiteboard, you can still, as long as you have a full and complete list, like a master list of your tasks and the things that have been assigned to you that you're responsible for. If you've got that master list, if it's in electronic format on the computer, if it's written down, that works too. That's also a visual indicator. You can always pull out your master list, or you can pull up your master list with your executive, and you can say, here's everything that I'm focused on today. Does this new priority that you're giving me, does it really go above these 5 things that I'm tackling today? And if so, which of these 5 things would you be okay with me redistributing till tomorrow? It's just a visual indicator. I like the whiteboard because it's so visible. I don't have to do anything. You can see it right behind me. You know, that's nice and easy. But it works with paper or computer as well. Patience asks, the whiteboard you suggested, can you give us an example of what that would look like? It's just one of those white plastic whiteboards that you can erase and write on. And so I usually, what I used to do as an assistant is I would put my most important tasks of the day. So typically that's going to range between like 3 and 6 items that are my most important things that have to get done today. And I'm going to put those up there each day. So if something comes in and it's like, tackle this now, everything else goes on hold, it's very clear what's going on hold, you know? And so that's, and sometimes what's going on hold doesn't matter a whole lot to my executive, right? Like, it's going to be a bigger problem for me because it's a long project and now I'm going to be a day behind, and he doesn't care about that, but that's okay. You know, he is now aware, at least, and now my executive could help make that decision with me in collaboration, and he could understand the juggling that I was doing. That's what it looked like for me. Hopefully that helps with answer your question. Okay, next question. When you or your boss works remotely, communication breaks down. I've encouraged better and more frequent dialogue, and it's not improved. What do you do? Oh, isn't that so funny? A lot of times in-person communication breaks down too. So yes, the only thing you can do is to have the consistent communication. Consistent communication is far more important than long stretches of time communicating. So don't try to, put an hour block on someone's calendar. It's more like if we can have 15 minutes every morning, that is far more effective. And you've got to get buy-in from the other person who's working remotely, that they have to be willing to do that as well. They have to see the value in it. You have to come to that meeting prepared to use that 15 minutes wisely so they understand, oh, this is really worth it for me. I would sit down with the person that you're trying to have more consistent communication with, and I would say, here's what I would like. I would like to have 15 minutes every morning by phone or by video chat, whatever's easiest for you. And here's why it's important, and define the reasons why that's important to them. Remember, it's all about what's in it for them. So it's a really common problem, whether or not you work remotely. Almost every assistant I've ever worked with in training is always saying it's the exact same problem. So we have to be very persistent, and they have to see the value in that consistent communication. Karen says, making priorities visible. What if you only have a few project items with multiple inherent steps on your board, but you have a lot of little routine responsibilities that take up your time that you wouldn't put on the board? People may think you don't have a lot on your plate. I think that's a worthy question, because those routine things absolutely do take up a good portion of your day. If possible, if you can say between 10 and 2, routine activities, you put that on your whiteboard, or you have, just routine activities written on there so that people understand that is a portion of your day. You could even put, routine activities 50%. So they understand half my day is spent on regular operational activities. So already off the bat, my 8-hour workday is down to 4 hours, because 4 hours is always going to be dedicated to these routine activities that have to be done daily. So that's one way to approach it. I recognize that routine activities are definitely going to take a piece of your day. And in some cases, you could actually put them on there. I had routine activities that I would do on only a monthly basis. But on a monthly basis, we did these huge mailings that would take an entire day for me to do if I dedicated a whole day to it. So the mailing, yes, it's a routine activity, but when the mailing was happening, I was going to have to be dedicating a good portion of my days to make that happen. Just checking in on questions that have come up. Thanks to everybody who's sharing all of your strategies for what you do and how you manage priorities and help others understand the things that are on your plate. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Shannon and Sherry, for saying whiteboard equals dry erase board. I didn't put that together. In my mind, I always just think of it as a whiteboard, but yes, it's a dry erase board. Thank you. Different lingo here. Okay, let's talk about setting limits with behavior. This is a little bit of a shift in conversation, but it's a very important one. And it also does have to do with respecting your limits in the workplace. I think particularly in interpersonal relationships in the workplace, a limit that gets pushed a lot is emotional limits. So how do we respect our emotional limits and set limits with other people's behavior? If someone's behavior is pushing my emotional limit, how do I manage that to get them, hopefully, to adapt their behavior slightly so that I'm not pushed to my limit? I think that a lot of times, again, we don't respect the limit. We don't really recognize kind of what's happening. And instead, we're really focusing on, this person caused me, they were rude, they were offensive, they were disrespectful, they were overly critical. We're thinking about all of the behavior, and we're not really recognizing okay, this is having an emotional impact on me, and this is something that might be useful to address and see if we can resolve. I am not a fan of the word bullying. I know it gets talked about a lot, but the term bullying in my mind is too vague. It can mean anything. I think it's used abundantly right now, and not necessarily in cases where it really qualifies. What I prefer is to articulate what is happening. Use your words to describe the behavior that's taking place. If you can't use your words to describe the behavior, then there's no sense in addressing the behavior, because you have to be able to describe exactly what's happening so you can describe what's not working. If all you can do is just say they're bullying, you haven't defined it clearly enough. So when we talk about setting limits with behavior, there is a quote that's at the top of the page. We teach people how to treat us by showing them what we are willing, there's a typo there, what we are willing to accept. The fill in the blank is accept. We teach people how to treat us by what we are willing to accept. This is a quote that is often, it's restated over and over and over again. I think it originally came from Maya Angelou. And I know Oprah Winfrey said it a lot back in the day with her talk show. That's where I originally heard it, that we teach people how to treat us by what we are willing to accept. Now, I want to be very clear that in the workplace, we have to be willing to accept that people have quirks, and we're not necessarily going to be best friends with everybody in the workplace. We just have to be willing to accept that fact, and pick our battles wisely. You know, there's only certain times when I personally have ever felt it necessary to set a limit based on someone's behavior that was pushing me to an emotional limit. And when I did that, typically I've done that because of a pattern of behavior that is impacting my ability to work. I let people have a bad day. You know, people have bad days. You know, and people make mistakes and they take it out on people they shouldn't. That's just what it means to be human. And I'm willing to be flexible, and I'm willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt, and I'm willing to give people chances. But when it becomes a pattern of behavior that is impacting my ability to do my job, that's when I address the situation. You may have different limits for yourself, but I encourage everyone in the workplace to develop a thick skin and recognize that people are flawed and people will make mistakes and they'll have bad days. And we work with a lot of type A personalities. You know, I have worked with some extremely difficult executives in the past, and you know, there is a thick skin component that is very important for being able to work successfully with other successful people in the workplace. That does not mean, though, that you have to accept everything and be a doormat. There are times when you do need to address the behavior and set a limit with people. And for those times, I've written out what the steps are. It's pretty clear. The steps, this is on the 3rd page of your handout. Address the situation after the emotion has passed, but as close to the situation as possible. So if something has happened and your boss has yelled at you, you don't want to necessarily address that situation right there while the yelling is happening. Let the emotion simmer down a little bit. And then later, after things have kind of, you know, gotten calm again, you can address the situation. And again, I would address it more as a pattern of behavior rather than like a one-time thing, because everybody has a bad day. I have been yelled at by executives before who were the most wonderful, kindest, gentlest people, but something just set them off. And it's like, okay, I know that's not you. I know that that was not really you talking, and we'll handle this. When it's a pattern of behavior, though, and it really is impacting your ability to do your work well, that's when You want to address it after the emotion is passed. State the unacceptable behavior very clearly. Again, using your words. It's not, this person's bullying me. Here's the behavior that's not acceptable. State the new acceptable behavior. So what change would you like to see? And then ask the person for agreement. So it's direct communication is the answer. Direct communication is always the answer. How you do that communication is going to vary based on who you are as a person and who the other person is that you're communicating with. So I would, kind of consider what communication might need to happen if you are in a situation where your limits are being pushed by another person consistently and you think it's time that something needs to change. Remember that in these situations, you have 3 options. You can accept it, you can change it, or you can leave it. So you have to determine what you're willing to accept. If you're not willing to accept something, you have to do your best to help change the situation. And keep in mind that we can't change other people. So you can request that something different happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that something different will happen because you can't change other people. At a certain point, you may say, you know what? I can't accept it. I can't change it. It's time for me to leave it. And I've seen people do that all the time. I had someone who asked me once, why should I have to leave? This person's bullying me. Why should I have to leave? Why don't they have to leave? Because you can't change other people. You can't make that person's decisions for them. You can only change your own reality, either how you're responding to the situation, or you can change and leave the organization, leave the situation. So I'll share with you a couple of examples, and then I want to check in on comments and questions, because I think that a lot of people have experienced this before, and I would love to know what you do to handle these situations. I'm going to pause for 1 minute because I see a couple of questions already. Give us all the Yes, Jackie, great point. Jackie asks, would you give us all the great ideas that are being discussed in the chat box, please? Yes, Jackie, I absolutely will. I will download the chat and I'll put a link to it in the Career Resource Library replay page. That's where the chats are always available for download. Not always, but the past few times I've been doing it, and I'm planning on doing it regularly because there is always so much good stuff in there. But you will only find the chat download in the library. So make sure that you're going to the library page and accessing it that way, because that's the only place where I can put it for you. Good question, though. Okay, good. So everybody, type in your questions or comments that you have about setting limits with behavior. And I'm going to share with you just 2 really quick personal incidents of my own that were successful for very different reasons. And then I'll share with you what I think worked well. First off, when I was an assistant, I did work for a very aggressive type A executive who was very unpersonable and got very aggressive on many occasions. And I realized there was a pattern of behavior around yelling, loudness and a lot of emotional intensity coming at me. And it was impacting my ability to do my job. So what happened was that, the pattern was that I would be yelled at and then there was always an apology. So I waited for the next apology. And when the apology came, I did follow what these steps are here, but I followed it. I kind of navigated in. You have to navigate these conversations based on the person that you are and based on the person that you're talking to. And I navigated this in a way that I felt really worked for us and our 2 personalities. So I basically said, when he apologized, I said, I really appreciate that. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what happens in those moments. I said, in those moments, I have this really primal instinct that kicks in when I hear yelling. And my primal instinct is like stress, it's fight or flight. And what that means is that I'm expending a lot of energy trying to manage that primal instinct instead of spending my energy trying to fix what you're upset about. And so, what would be useful is if I could put all of my energy into trying to fix your situation that you're upset about, instead of having to manage the fight or flight that just naturally is occurring because of the emotional intensity of the situation. And I actually, I kind of jokingly suggested that he use a code word. I'm like, next time, say code red. When you say code red, I will know, drop everything. This is a big deal. There's a lot of emotion behind this, and I need to take it very seriously. If I hear code red, I know that, and I don't need all of the emotion from it because I get it. And so, he didn't ever use code red in that way, but he did use it later and said, this is not a code red, So it kind of became a little bit of a joke between us. And what I found happened, I'm not going to say that he never again raised his voice and put emotional energy on me. He absolutely did. But what I found is that he reined himself in a little bit quicker. It got to a place where I was kind of able to go, okay. I would physically put my hand, not up, but I would put my hand kind of out and just say, okay, I understand. And he knew that when I was doing that I got it. I don't need the emotional energy anymore. It's just going to take my energy away from fixing the problem. Let's fix the problem. I understand what the problem is. Let's fix it now. And so that conversation really did help. It didn't evaporate the behavior because people are people. People do what people do. But I was really happy with the progress that conversation helped our relationship have. I have in the past, I'm actually going to pause because I'm seeing so many comments that I want to just get to and check in on before the end of the hour. So instead of sharing another story, I'm going to take a look here. Janet, the accept it, change it, or leave it. Those are your options. Accept it, change it, leave it. Cynthia asks, what's the best way to communicate with type A people who are difficult because how they speak to people is, I don't know how else to describe it, catty. Yes. So I am a firm believer that type A personalities they're so common in the workplace, especially when you're working with executives, and you've got to get to a place where A, thick skin, and B, you really understand how to best communicate with your particular type A personality. A lot of times what I know is that, the more that you can be brief, be direct, be straightforward. They don't like beating around the bush. They don't like tangents. They don't like, more, personal asides, especially in moments where there is something very important on the table. Give that the attention it needs. And that's where, for me, I work really well with a type A personality because I tend to be very, very assertive and direct myself. And so if you are not that type of personality naturally, it does help to kind of meet them where they are, and kind of raise your assertiveness, your sense of urgency, your business, business interaction. Make it all about business and not about these side things. In terms of this one, a type A personality who's catty, there might be some just like undertones maybe that are happening with this person where they're kind of like being snide about other people. I would not respond to those things. If it's not business, I'm not going to engage in a catty conversation about people. But Cynthia, if that's not accurately kind of identifying the type of person that you're talking about, let me know and I'll go further into that. I'm just taking a look further at comments here. I love it that you guys are talking, you're sharing your challenges and helping one another. That's great. The last fill in the blank, Liberty, was accept. Accept. We teach people how to treat us by showing them what we are willing to accept. Or, as you said, Liberty, tolerate would also work, but what we're willing to accept, what we're willing to put up with. Remember, accept it, change it, or leave it. It looks like we've got a discussion happening here about dealing with a micromanager. I have had a micromanager myself, and I know how very tedious it can be. In my personal experience, when I was dealing with a micromanager, I just allowed her to micromanage. And I had to accept the things I cannot change. And that's what worked for me. And ultimately, it was a really good relationship. Even though I could have had way more independence and autonomy, it just wasn't the way that my manager was going to work. And I figured out very quickly that I couldn't change that. I'm not seeing clearly where the question, oh, here we go. A couple are popping out now as red. How does one deal with someone who is type A ADHD personality? Ooh, he has slowed down his speaking, but still talks fast. And I'm better at asking him to repeat. And he has started to send me email follow-ups to my questions about what he wants. Yeah, an ADHD personality and type A, that is, I mean, your best bet is trying to help keep them focused. That's probably, kind of a good role for you if you're the assistant, Kimberly, is to help keep them focused and point them in the direction that they need to be going. If the problem is logistics, that he's speaking so quickly that you're really not understanding him, it sounds like you've got a good system going where you're asking him to repeat it if you don't understand. That's all you can do. And it sounds like he is starting to speak a little bit slower, and email is always a great way. With ADHD and people who are really pulled in those multiple directions, they're usually pretty aware of it. And they usually want to rein it in and manage it. They don't want it to run completely wild because that's not helpful. So perhaps you can even ask, what can I do to help manage it? Is there anything that would be helpful for me to do? Help you identify some priorities in the morning, check in with things on, around noon, whatever it is. It might be worthwhile just kind of opening up the conversation if that would be useful. Courtney says, what if your manager does not want to know your day-to-day tasks? In terms of managing expectations, that's fine. They don't have to. You don't have to, make it visible and help them understand what all's on your plate. But in terms of managing expectations, you do want to be really clear about what you have available. Here's the available time that I have to focus on this project today. And if they want you to focus on that project today, then you've got to do some reprioritization of other tasks, and you might need to inform them. Okay, so this task that you were expecting today, then I'm going to have to get that to you tomorrow so I can focus on this new one. Just keep them as minimally informed as they need to be. But to some degree or another, they know what's on your plate because they're handing something to you, and you've got to manage those expectations. You've got to talk to them about these things and give them a heads up if something needs to be pushed, or if some deadline needs to be changed, or some outcome needs to be revised. You've got to keep them informed of that to a certain degree. Jackie asks, what if your manager doesn't know how to assign tasks but expects you to help them? They're scattered in explaining projects, and so it's difficult to take on tasks and projects. How do you help them? What a common problem. There's a lot of managers that don't really know how to manage or how to delegate. So as I'm assuming, Jackie, that you're an assistant, and I could be wrong, but one of the things, if you have assignments that are coming at you and you're not getting enough information, My recommendation is that you really guide that conversation to obtain the information that you need. So a lot of times a manager will toss something at you and you're going to have questions that are follow-up, and that's okay. You need to then go back and get the information that you need. They're not going to know just right off the bat exactly what you need to follow through on the assignment. And in that conversation, I've had many of those conversations before where something's been thrown at me, and then I say, great, I'm going to get 30 minutes on your calendar so I can ask you some more questions about this. And then during that conversation, I say, okay, we've got to look at adjusting the timeline here, because now that I'm very clear on what all we're talking about, there's going to, we need to give ourselves a little more space to be able to get this accomplished. So hopefully that helps address the question. If your manager isn't very good at communicating, guide the communication, ask for what you need, talk them through it. And that's really the only way I've ever found, is we got to train people how to use us, how to leverage us. Great. Thanks, Jackie. I'm glad that helped. Fantastic, everyone. Thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour. Such great questions. I felt like there was going to be some good conversation around these topics today. So I really appreciate that all of you shared your experiences, and you also you gave your opinions, and you shared your best practices. That's exactly what chat's there for. And Jackie, I do see you saying that it looks like I changed my hair color. It's just a little more red this time, I think. I didn't intentionally change the hair color, but I'm glad that you like it. It might be a little bit too dynamic, too jazzy. So we'll see if it looks the same next month. But thanks, everybody, for your kind words and for being here. As always, it's so much fun. I appreciate it. And I'll see you, next month. We are talking about teamwork. I'm really excited about this one. I've got some cool stuff to share with you on the topic, and I know it's probably a topic that you've heard a lot before, but hopefully I'm going to have some new things for you on how to enhance teamwork, particularly for my admin folks. This is a big deal. I think administrative teams sometimes have a lot of infighting, and they aren't as collaborative as they could be. So I'm going to have some great strategies for you. Please be here next month, and I'd love to see you in a few more weeks for the Q&A session too. Yes, I will see you in Vegas for APC as well. Those of you who are going to APC in September, yes, it's going to be so much fun. Can't wait to see you. Please run up to me and give me a great big hug if you see me there. I'd love to meet any of you who are there. Okay, now we're done. Thanks, everybody. Bye.